Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. It's Andres and Kenzie back in one of our solo episodes. You guys listen to our last one. You guys know that Kenzie is now our newest, the only one that I've ever had podcast sidekick.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, what's going on? What's new in your life, Kenzie? Is there any kind of like updates or highlights or anything like that that you got going on up in Canada? What part of Canada you live in? I don't think we
I
talked about it
live.
last time.
Yeah, I didn't mention it last time. I just said Canada, but it's a big place. So, I live about an hour and a half away from Toronto right now,
Okay.
and in the fall, I'm moving to Toronto for school,
Ooh.
and yeah, so I'm excited about that.
How much you have 1 year left of school?
I have 2 years left,
2 years
or
left.
2 years
Okay.
left of the undergrad.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's so cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I've never been to Canada. Definitely be kind of like a place we wanted to go to. I actually had a friend that lived in Toronto, uh, for like a couple of years now, actually. And he loved it. It's just a little cold sometimes, but
Yeah,
that's just Canada.
that's the main problem with it.
Yeah. Cool. Well, last time I think the conversation was awesome because we talked a little bit more about what we've done with some of our clients. And then you came up with this great idea for us to kind of like talk about not only like what we did throughout the entire process, but it's most like for maybe something more practical for people to understand on where to get started when it comes down to like weight loss, fat loss, or achieving nutrition and fitness goals, right?
Yeah. So, what happens when you're at the very beginning, when you kind of feel like you're at rock bottom, you don't know where to go first, and you just feel like everything's a mess? That's like, where's the starting point?
So what do you see like in your opinion, just so and
Yeah.
I'll kind of tell you obviously what I see also, like what do you think is like what people typically kind of recur to like when they're in that kind of breaking point and they're just kind of like looking for solutions and what is like, because I see obviously all kinds of different things presented to them and sometimes not the greatest.
Yeah. I think a lot of people's first idea is to go on a really restrictive diet because they're like, I have to solve this problem fast. Like, it needs to be resolved right now. And the quickest way to do that is to lose weight quickly. So, they go on some crazy diet and restrict their calories, and then it just ends up backfiring.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're just kind of like looking for that quick fix. And I think about it the way I explained it, it's like okay, they're looking for band-aids, and they're not really addressing the root cause. And the problem with all of these, and if you guys are listening to this, it's most likely something that you may have run or across at some point. Is like you're trying to do something to advance, trying to follow all this like list of directions, and the reality is that it's pretty. You can follow directions. Following diets, you become really good at following directions, but you don't really understand exactly how or why you did it, right? And a lot of times those directions become overwhelming over time and simply not sustainable. It's kind of like you're just literally trying to do way too many different things at once. And there's obviously that intrinsic motivation that at the beginning you start with, and you're like, yes, I'm ready to do this. And you do all the things by the book, but eventually you're like, oh my God, here's like week 3, here goes week 4. And then you typically starts to dwindle because of the fact that you just like went way too hard on way too many different things like that. I think that's usually the biggest kind of problem that happens with that.
Yeah, and creating a lot of rules and make a very specific plan and saying, okay, I'm going to follow these rules and that will lead to my outcome. But often having those kind of rules just once that motivation fades, the you don't have any habits in place to sustain any of the positive behaviors you're trying to
Yeah.
implement.
Yeah, and I think, and we're gonna call this podcast. I think we call it the lowest hanging fruit, because like the main thing that we're trying to kind of get across is how to get started in a way that is realistic that you can sustain. Because the goal of anything that we do, in terms of teaching people how to manage their health, their nutrition, their lifestyle, is, and I usually kind of say this to every single person I talk to, I don't care so much about you achieving your goal as to maybe as I care much more about your ability to be able to sustain that goal, right? So what's the point? Which is obviously something that happens, like we see people that come in here and say, I want to lose weight for my wedding, right? And then like they do all these kind of crazy restrictive things, they get to their goal, they're like looking like the lowest weight they've ever been to, they look amazing, they look like, oh my God, look how beautiful. And then like 3 months later they're like, what happened? Like, where was that? Like, you did not look like this in, like, 3 months ago. And I've seen it very often. And recently I was having a conversation with one of my friends, which actually, like, at the time this recording already happened, we're doing like a live in Spanish actually. And she was talking about somebody that she knows that that's exactly what happens. And we've seen pictures, like two complete different humans. So like, this person, you saw her like 3 months ago, and it has nothing to judge. It's just the fact that, it's probably exhausting to kind of go through this like roller coasters of up and down. So a lot of times what we define and what we found after coaching hundreds of people is that sometimes we need to start with the basics, and we call that the lowest hanging fruits. So that's
Yeah.
probably what we're going to be kind of covering a little bit today.
Yeah, I think a good place to start is when people come to you looking for support, often there's something that triggers them to make that decision to invest in nutrition coaching, some issues that are coming up. So what do you typically see as the factor that tells someone I need to make a change and I need to really invest in my health?
Funny you ask, because I literally just had a conversation with somebody about this, which is, it's not usually what they're eating. Sure, that's a big thing, but it's their mindset. It's really the way that they see their perception that they have around nutrition, right? Usually, we live in a world where everybody thinks that there's good and bad food. Like, carbs are bad, protein is good, bread is bad, vegetables are good. Like, so it's like this dichotomy that exists between those two things. And when you draw a line between those two areas, prohibited items become desirable, and non-prohibited items become boring, because that's just like, oh, like, the good food, like, okay, I need to eat healthy. And what I have found is to typically have this like mental on and off switch, right? That it's like, I'm either on a diet or I'm off the diet. And off the diet, it's like I can do whatever I want. And on the diet is, I'm just going to be kind of like following these directions, or just eating things just from the list of foods. So what I typically tend to see the biggest problem when they're starting and kind of their breaking point is that constant cycle that they go through, and that on and off. And that's what they're trying to kind of get rid of. It's like, I'm just exhausted of dieting. I'm exhausted of trying this over and over and over again. There, statistically speaking, in the US, like the average American, I don't know about Canada, but the average, I'm sure maybe it's closer, but the average American goes on diets at least 4 times a year. That is every 3 months, which is makes sense, because it's, you take a month, you're super excited, it's like, oh my god, you start seeing progress. Month two, you're like, okay, starts to slow down. Month three, you just kind of throw it all out the window, very inconsistent. And then you're like, okay, like, I'm done. And then you try something different, because that quote unquote didn't work, right? So that dichotomy that exists in people, and that on and off switch mentality, it's usually the biggest thing that they need to start correcting at the very beginning. And that's like the first thing that needs to be addressed.
Mhm. So let's get a little bit more into the lowest hanging fruit topic. When someone comes to you like that, where they've got that on and off switch mentality, they see things as good and bad. What are the first kind of things you start working on, and how does that relate to this idea of the lowest hanging fruit?
So I think the well, actually, we ask a lot of questions in our intake forms and stuff like that with some of our clients. So these are maybe some questions that you can kind of start asking yourselves, which is usually so we can help and identify what is some of the things that you have the biggest struggle with, right? And a lot of times we kind of put those into a scale, right? On a scale of 1 to 5, what did you something that you typically struggle with? Like, for example, is it food preparation? Is it maybe having the time to cook? Is it not knowing what to put on your plate? Is it maybe fear of what you're eating is going to make you quote unquote gain weight? And once we identify that, and then just so you guys understand the analogy and the concept of the lowest hanging fruit, it's like, I want you guys to imagine that you kind of find, like, my neighbor has a mango tree out there, right? So imagine, like, you're like, oh my god, I'm hungry, and you're walking around, you're like, oh, I there's a mango tree, and they have these beautiful mangoes, like all around, right? But the best ones are gonna be at the very top, right? How hard it is for you to be able to reach those. There's likely chance that you're gonna have to climb the tree, and if you don't know how to climb a tree, that's gonna be very difficult for you to do. Maybe you're gonna have to get a ladder. You're gonna have to do all these different things like that, just so you can kind of get to that beautiful, like, perfect mango that is on the top, right? Versus obviously, like, the things that are maybe at the bottom, they're really good looking mangoes. They're great. Maybe they're not going to like be exactly what you were hoping to achieve, or to really get, or to be able to kind of eat, but they're easy for you to be able to reach. You just need to kind of like raise your hand up, and you be able to kind of grab like 3 or 4 of them, right? The whole concept in nutrition and the lowest hanging fruit is trying to identify what those things are going to be for you. So I want you to imagine that the top of that tree is going to be like your end goal, like the six pack for some people, like the amazing performance, like the energy, the vitality, like the all these different things, like the macro counting, all this stuff that is going to help you just completely transform and change your life. If you were starting there, you're going to stumble a lot because you don't know how to climb the tree yet. So you're trying to kind of find the shortcuts, and you try to like do all these different things, and you're wasting so much time and doing things that are simply not going to be sustainable. So what are those like lowest hanging fruits that I typically tend to people to see? It's just some of the basics, the most basic boring stuff that we typically start with. Sometimes it's going to be, you know what? Number one, we need to start creating a meal routine, right? So many people typically go through the day and they're like, one day they have breakfast, and other days they don't have breakfast because they don't have time. Some days they just typically skip lunch because they're just too busy. Some days they typically just don't skip lunch and go out and just kind of splurge. And other days they typically bring like a snack that is not very kind of like nutrient dense. Other times they skip altogether the entire day of foods, and usually they come home at night and they're literally devouring everything that is in the kitchen. Those inconsistent patterns are typically the reason why you're probably struggling with so many different things, such as energy and just kind of consistent, kind of like the way you feel, your workouts, all these different things like that, right? Because you're not creating a consistent pattern around that. So the first thing that we typically try to start with is saying, you know what? We don't need to kind of start creating a specific diet or plan or anything like that. We just now need to create specific times in which you're consuming certain foods. Let's just start and sit down to have breakfast, your lunch, and your dinner. That is your only goal and the one thing you're going to be focused on in the next like week or two. Is that good? Yes, perfect. Okay, cool. Like let's actually kind of make that work. And then we start creating the tools and the strategies to help that person accomplish that. So that's one. We're gonna maybe kind of talk through maybe the top three, and then maybe we'll stop
Yeah.
in there to see if there's anything that we need to go. The second thing I typically kind of get people to start to think about is more on like what they need to be eating more of and less of, right? Okay, like we need to maybe start incorporating more things. I'm more of a big fan. Like my kind of philosophy on dietetics is what can we add more into your diet, not remove, right? Because most people think and they come to me and they say, Andres, like, what are you going to tell me I can't eat? Please don't remove this from me because I love this. And I'm like, who have you been working with and what have you been doing? Because that's the typical kind of mentality that exists. So rather than doing that, we say, okay, what do we need to add more into your diet? Okay, do you typically have like a sandwich for breakfast? How about we add a sandwich and maybe add like a piece of fruit in there too? So you can add a little extra fiber. So sometimes the lowest hanging fruit, pun intended, it's adding fruit to like sometimes like some meals. Like, so you can add a little extra fiber, some extra energy, and maybe that could be even like a dessert option. So you, instead of going for like the candy bar, you may be reaching for something like a bowl of like pineapple or like fresh cup watermelon or something like that, right? That's going to help you be more satiated and usually makes you feel better. And the last one, which is the number three, which is what everybody typically needs to work on, is what I have in here, which is obviously drinking enough water, right? So many people underestimate the easiest and cheapest thing that they need to do is actually fix their hydration levels and fixing their hydration like intake. And that's usually something that most people are not getting enough of. And sometimes fixing those three things solve so many problems in people's diets and nutrition, and immediately start to feel like, oh my God, I feel better. I feel like I have more energy, of course, because you're consistently fueling your body.
And with when people start, do you usually try and get them to start all three of those habits at once, or do you introduce that slowly over time?
It depends on the person, actually. So like that's a part of too that we kind of evaluate what like different kinds of people's personalities. So there's people that are gonna like they're all out personalities, right? They're like, oh, I just like that's it. Oh, that's all I need to do. Those are usually the people that I will actually have them do just one or two things at a time, which is ironic, right? Because they're just so used to doing everything. Like, well, Roxy's one of our like long-term clients, and then she also works with us right now. So Roxy, I remember the first time that we ever actually had, like I sent her like her initial protocol and everything. She literally sent me a picture like, the next day. She's like, I'm ready for this. And she had like books and she had like homework and notes and all these different things like annotated on all the things that she needed to do. And I said, Roxy, I love what you're doing. It's great. But I want to make sure that if you're going to do this in 6 months from now, you're still doing the same thing. And she kind of stopped for a second. You're like, and she's like, what do you mean? I was like, well, you need to have the same level of enthusiasm and the same level of application to your nutrition as you're having right now. So you think this is exactly what you're going to have in 6 months. And she's like, yeah. So she still did it. But then a month after, she's like, oh, this is so hard. It's like, because you started too strong. You started sprinting. So we need to figure out people's abilities to be able to take off running first, to figure out what they can kind of handle. And I usually recommend anywhere between 2 to 3 things at a time, because those are things that people sometimes can handle. Because lowest hanging fruits can come in different forms. Those are the nutrition ones. But we typically can actually start to talking about some maybe some lifestyle specific kind of like, actionable items or specific practices or skills that people need to kind of start to work on. Maybe some mindset related practices. So sometimes it can be even just movement, right? Somebody that doesn't work out, it could be just like, okay, like maybe let's start like 0 workouts per week. You're not gonna go to work out 6 days a week now, which is something that happens often. They enter this like challenges and these things in a gym that is nearby. They got this ad and they go from 0 to 60 in like 2.5 seconds. That's too quick, right? So it's like trying to do way too many different things. So what I would start to say is like, oh, like how about we start maybe going on like a 10-minute walk 3 days a week, right? It's simply, and it's also like to answer also more specifically to your question, what do we start with? It's usually what we feel is the most important priority for them, depending on what they feel like it's important. And that's the thing too, that for people listening, you have to ask yourself that question. It's like, what is the immediate thing that you feel like you can connect and you can fix right now that is within your control?
Yeah. And
That's the
also
way that
what's
we
going to
do
have
it.
a big trickle down effect too. And I think you've talked about before about keystone habits,
Yep.
and the core habit that's going to create all of these positive
Yep.
benefits. So that's very similar to lowest hanging
Yeah,
fruit, I'd
and
say.
and then just so we can elaborate on that, a keystone habit is simply the one thing that you're doing every single day to try to improve. And you can think about keystone habits in like general, like, domains like fitness and nutrition, or it can be also like on your work. It can also be like, maybe family and relationships, or it can be like faith based or spirituality, right? Now, those are big kind of buckets, but you can start to also think about keystone habits. That's the one thing that you can do to kind of set your day up for success. So, for example, a keystone habit is to say, I'm going to have one of these 3 breakfast options that I really know how to do, and they're balanced and I love them because that sets up my day for success. So, that's the only habit that you're trying to kind of build, until obviously that feels so like natural and so easy for you to do that you don't even have to think about it in the morning. And that just becomes something so like habitual that you can add more things into some other areas that you need to change. Because what we found is that when somebody starts to work on things like that, like one thing like that, other areas of their life typically tend to improve. So like, okay, I had a good breakfast, I feel good, and then maybe they may be inclined not to kind of like screw it up and do and make bad decisions around lunch. So they're maybe just making sure that they have like a smaller breakfast and they had enough time to be able to prep their lunch to bring to work with them, right? So that kind of starts trickle down into that. And then because of that, dinner comes around, they're like, okay, like I worked really hard to be able to kind of maintain my consistency. So, and then those things start to add up, and then you have more energy, and then you can now start adding workouts, and things start to kind of like add up into that, versus obviously starting with everything all at once.
Yeah, I think an important thing to mention is that it's not just for the beginners, these keystone habits, people who are starting out their nutrition and fitness journey. It can also be for people who have maybe fallen off track for a bit. Something came up in their life. They went through a stressful time. I think we all go through periods of time where our health isn't our biggest focus. And if you define what those keystone habits are and what those lowest hanging fruit are, that's always what you can come back to.
Yeah. What would be yours, for example? Like if you were thinking every time that, like you feel like you're too busy with school, or like kind of things that like that happen, what would be maybe like, do you have any specific ones that you feel like, okay, these are like the minimum things that right now I need to do to help you obviously kind of get back into like the groove? If I make like, I guess I can call it that way.
Yeah, and I actually said that because I would say that's something I'm trying to focus on right now is being in summer school right now and working away on that. I'm trying to say what's the minimum for me. So one is definitely starting the morning with meditation. My morning routine in general is something I'm pretty consistent about because it just takes half an hour and it sets my day up for success. The other one is exercise. I love to exercise, but I think I sometimes get in a pattern where it's like it has to be 45 minutes, it has to be an hour, but reminding myself, 15 minutes is good. That's still that that minimum effective dose, which I think we'll talk about a bit later.
Yeah.
And then I think I would say the third one is going for a walk each day. So movement is a big one for me. And in terms of nutrition, um, I think prioritizing protein at every meal is a big one
Yep.
because I mean
Yep.
it's a classic
It's a
classic
classic, and I
response.
and I sometimes I struggle to kind of see it myself because I've done it for so long that I don't necessarily kind of pay attention to it. But every single one of my breakfasts I've been sharing this week, I was like, okay, like this morning I was like making breakfast for Gv, and I was like, okay, she wants something like sweet and savory, so we made toast with like she had peanut butter and like dark chocolate chips and like jam, right? So like she had two of those, and then one, and she's allergic to eggs, so she can't have eggs. So we're like, okay, like she can have that. And the other one, it was just like a little bit of cheese, a little bit of turkey, and then some avocado. So immediately in the moment that I'm making it, I said to her, "Is like, I think there's not enough protein in your plate." Now, I'm thinking of this already because I'm doing it so often, and I know the whole idea of like, importance of kind of getting enough protein for recovery and all that kind of stuff like that. Then it's just so ingrained in me that I know, okay, like I probably need to add something. So she literally added something extra to it to help obviously kind of supplement that. So that's just one example. But then it goes back to like all the things that you kind of mentioned. It's like, okay, I don't have as much time. I have all these different things going on. I got all the I'm gonna get 10 minutes of walking. I'm gonna start my morning with like my morning routine that kind of sets me up for success. And I agree with you 100% because when I don't do that, I feel like my weeks are a little off. And that's definitely something that also needs to be kind of worked on in terms of that. So
Yeah.
those are good.
Yeah, and another great nutrition keystone habit that you can start incorporating is incorporating 5 different vegetables throughout the day. I
Okay.
think that's a super simple one that because I can kind of check it off, be like, okay, I had some tomatoes at breakfast, I had some spinach and cucumber in my smoothie. And if I try and set that goal of hitting 5 and getting some variety, that really it pushes me to be a bit more creative with my meals and um, get in some more veggies.
Yeah. So those are definitely kind of like, key important areas that I think are helpful to incorporate. So yeah, so that's usually kind of like the whole like in general terms like the concept of what we kind of call the lowest hanging fruit, and it's really helping you identify. So and I guess like if you can kind of have some like homework for people listening in right now, it's like making a list of all the things right now that you're like what your main goals are right now. It's like, okay, where did you want to go? And what is the minimum thing that you can do that you feel is going to help you be better than you were yesterday? I think we talked about this at some point. I don't know if it was like last week or maybe in one of our group calls, but you know this book because you read it, and GB just did as well. James Clear wrote a book called The Atomic Habits, and he had this idea or like this whole concept of like 1% better every day turns into 38% better, or 38 times better at the end of a year, right? So that's like a lot, right? It doesn't sound like a whole lot. And 1% better every day can be having that one thing that you did that you didn't do yesterday, then you're doing it consistently, right? How can you be 1% better this week than you were last week? And slowly those things start to obviously kind of trickle into obviously bigger things. That's, I think, like the power that can have. I just think the problem when most people see it is like they don't think that's enough, and then they start to look for all the different kinds of alternatives, and they get lured into what we call like like the shiny object syndrome, which is what we're bombarded with things every day. Like you're doing all this like, okay, I'm going to start adding protein every single day, and then you kind of get on Instagram and the first thing that you see, it's an ad for like this super awesome like fat burner pill that is going to help you shed like you know 15 pounds in the first like month or so, like that. When you see something like that, and your biggest kind of problem and issue is that you've been struggling with weight loss for so long, then out of the sudden the protein with every meal becomes so stupid for some people, and like the fat burning pill that it costs like $50 that you deep inside know it doesn't work, it sounds too good to be true, but you typically kind of go for that. So what happens is like now the lowest hanging fruit, you stop doing that, you get the pill, you get the thing, 2 months later the pill didn't work, and now you're back to square one. That's the reality behind every person's journeys, and why we have so many clients that struggle with those things.
Yeah, and I think it's not even just like the big shiny like this fat burner, all of these names that are saying, okay, you're going to lose weight fast. It's not just the big programs. I think it's also the smaller, the influencers and the things that they're showing and not real not realizing that they've already mastered the lowest hanging fruit. They're at a different point in their journey, and so maybe they moved on to some of the next level of on the tree, if we're going to use
Yeah,
that
because they
analogy.
compare themselves with somebody else's chapter, right? It's like I think
Yeah.
somebody's saying, like said, like, you can't compare your chapter 1 with somebody else's chapter 20, right? When you see all these like influencers with this like, incredible bodies and all these different things like that, and you want to do what that person is doing, but they don't realize that that person started somewhere like maybe years ago, right? Like that's for example somebody that comes to me and like they like, and they see me lifting weight. I've been lifting weights for, gosh, like at least 10 to 12 years, like consistently, 12, like 10 years, I would say consistently, right? If somebody kind of sees me doing a deadlift, that I've been doing deadlift for freaking 8 to 10 years, right? And they're starting from the beginning and they want to lift a specific weight that now I can lift because I built in strength over the years. That's my current like my lifting experience is a chapter 20. You can't expect to start there. You have to start at chapter 1. So the same thing applies with nutrition, right? You can't expect to do all these different things and have all these habits built overnight and expect that that's obviously going to be. That's what these diets do. Like they're typically are trying to kind of place everybody on the same chapter, right? Not understanding exactly that sometimes like you need to start with some basic things in the process. So
Yeah, and what you're going on, what you're saying about people looking at other people and seeing that end result. I think another thing on Instagram that can be kind of problematic is people posting their what I eat in a day videos and then but starting off with a shot, like a full body shot in the mirror, being like, okay, this is what I eat and this is what I look like. And from that, a lot of people can say, oh, like I should eat this to look like this. But what you don't see is they've been eating like this for years. They have all these other lifestyle habits that are supporting their body looking in that way.
yeah.
And it's not just this direct like eat this and here's the outcome that you
Yeah,
had.
and the problem is when you have such a really deep issue and such a big problem that emotionally affects you every day, like anything you see that triggers that emotion in you is going to immediately sound like something that you want to experiment with. Because if they can do it, I can probably do it. And I agree. If they can do it, you can do it too. But you have to create realistic expectation on what that is. And going back to the lowest hanging fruit things is sometimes you start with the basics, and the basics, if you're patient enough to see this process through, is going to lead you to obviously a point where you're going to have more control over those things, and eventually you're going to get to that chapter 20 when you look back. And what is it that Steve Jobs said? Like sometimes you can't connect the dots looking forward, you connect them looking backwards, which it makes perfect sense because you look back and you're like, oh my god, like I can't believe like all the things like over all the years. And sometimes with my clients that have been working with me for the longest time, is like, do you remember at the very beginning when it was even hard for you to be able to kind of like include protein or have like an actual meal sitting down in a table? And I have them reflect. I was like, what does your life look like right now? Like, and they kind of go through this long list of things. And I asked them, did you develop that in a week? And they're like, no. But remember how you wanted to do all this in a week, right? Yes. But you trusted the process and you said, you know what? I'm gonna focus on just a couple of things. And those couple of things turn into 4 and 6 and 8 and 10. And before he knew it, 2 years later, you're like, holy crap, not only transform your body, achieve your goals, but now you also have all the tools and the strategies to be able to sustain that. That is the true thing. But sometimes mentally, it's hard to see that through because we are impatient humans. We're just the most impatient species that probably exist in the universe, right? So of course we're always going to struggle with that, and we're going to doubt those things when we see other people obviously accomplish incredible things compared to what we can accomplish in a specific time.
Yeah. So we've been talking about these basics, and I think it's important we talk maybe a little bit about what you shouldn't be starting out with, and so what's the next level up once the basics are mastered, just to kind of differentiate, like what is considered basic, or what do you consider basic versus
Yeah,
what is a step up?
I love that because everybody starts at a different place. I'm including people sometimes that we coach. They're all different, right? Like for example, like if I was coaching you, I already know that because I know you, I know that you know what carbs and proteins are, you know what fats are, you have a pretty consistent routine in the mornings. You already kind of are a person that is like, have a really good exercise routine, knows how to exercise, know movement. But if I obviously compare yourself to maybe somebody that, you know, they're don't exercise, they don't even know what a carb is. The only kind of like thing that they know about carbs is like they did keto, and then just kind of like followed this like kind of like steps a few months ago, and they kind of were effective with that. So you're two different humans and two different people with different knowledges or different kind of like knowledge bases. So what we need to do is your longest hanging fruit right now is going to be completely different to that person. And what we're trying to develop right now in our programs is trying to kind of like build that into basically levels or phases, right? A level one person, maybe the lowest hanging fruit is going to be like making sure that you're knowing how to build a plate, making sure that you know and like how to like how to establish portions, maybe looking at your hands. Maybe it's going to be just to kind of create a movement type of like plan for you, not necessarily an exercise plan. So that's going to be maybe the longest hanging fruits for somebody that is just starting off, right? And understanding and also learning. Here's what carbohydrates are. This is what calories are. This is what proteins are. This is what the fats are going to be, right? And then kind of starting slowly from those three things. Now, maybe for somebody like you, it's going to be your longest hanging fruit, lowest hanging fruit is going to be, well, maybe I don't need to teach you how to build a plate. You already know how to do that. Maybe perhaps for you is figuring out exactly, okay, like how are we timing your meals? Like what times based on your goals? Maybe you're trying to get better at the gym and trying to gain strength. So I'm gonna like, okay, like maybe we need to add maybe more carbohydrates around this specific meal. And this is exactly what we need to do. And this is how we can kind of try to make it happen. So maybe your lowest hanging fruit right now is going to be to add X amount of carbs in the form of this, maybe like, 30 minutes before your workouts. And then let's just start with that. Perfect. Okay. So it's a little bit different because I already know that your rest of the day is typically better. And somebody even more advanced, let's say, for example, like I work a lot with like dietitians and stuff like that, that they just need accountability. And sometimes like when like here's obviously when we start to think about what kind of tool do we need to use for the job. This is where we kind of get into the whole idea about macro counting, calorie counting. All those things that we've done in terms of nutrition coaching are tools, and tools are just simply just exactly what they mean. It's a tool to help get the job done. Now, for example, somebody that is a more advanced, somebody that knows what carbs and fats and carbs and all these different things are, they have good kind of background, all these different things, but maybe perhaps they just don't know because they lack accountability and they don't know if they're doing the things correctly. Maybe they're under fueling their body, maybe they're over fueling their body. So we need to make adjustments in terms of that. For example, for somebody's like lowest hanging fruit at that level, which is like a little bit more advanced, maybe somebody that is like on a timeline. They're like, I want to get to a specific kind of way. For example, we work a lot with athletes. So they needed to kind of get to a specific type of point because they had a competition. So in those cases, there's obviously a timeline that is like, very tight. So in those cases, we need to use tools that are going to be more specific, and their lowest hanging fruits, unfortunately, become more like, okay, like you need to make sure that you're tracking everything that you're eating right now. Maybe not hitting specific numbers, but maybe it's at least tracking what you're doing so we can become aware of what it is and then start making adjustments based on those things. And maybe that could be the first step that you can take. So you see, like we try to like see where people are starting, because if I give obviously a macro counting plan and I say I need you to eat this many grams of protein, carbs, and fats, and I want to make sure that you adjust this, which honestly I have done in the past, and I realized that it was a big mistake, is literally kind of giving somebody that has no clue where to start and how to do certain things to go from there. And granted, there are people that are pretty self-sufficient, and there are people that are like super like eager to learn, especially when they're working with somebody and they start like that and they crush it and they obviously make this a lifestyle and they make it better. That is a personality thing, right? Because and that's why we need to kind of figure out what the right tool for the job is. If you tell me and I don't know anything about nutrition and I'm starting from zero, I'm a person that is very analytical and I like numbers. So perhaps that's a tool that I can maybe use in a very simple, basic way at the very beginning, versus somebody that is like, I hate numbers. I don't even want to talk about numbers. Maybe in even if that was a level 3 person that knows a lot more about nutrition, I wouldn't even use that tool in that case. But that's how we try to identify depending on where somebody's starting, based on their knowledge, based on what they're ready, willing, and able to do as well, which is the last, like the other part too, that I just want to make a quick parenthesis on, which is you can say like you're ready to obviously do macro counting. Are you willing to do it consistently? Sure. Now, are you able to do it? Well, I have a pretty busy job and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. So you're ready, you're willing to do it, but you're simply not able to do it right now. So anytime that you ask yourself, like, okay, what can I start? Adding a vegetable with every meal. Are you ready to do it? Yes. Are you willing to do it? Yes. Are you able to do it? You know what? Yes, because I can cook those things or I can do X, Y, or Z. That's what we do. So we need to try to figure out with people like what are they be able to do and actually accomplish in terms of those things. One thing is to want to do something and to say I'm going to do it, and the other part is actually doing it and executing on it.
Yeah, and I think people also come into it saying, "I want to lose fat," but they don't know the tools to get in that direction. So I think that's a lot of one of the valuable things about working with a coach is the coach has all these tools. They've used the tools on hundreds of people. They know who the tools work for and who they don't work for, and can apply them to the job.
Yeah, I mean that's really all we do, and it's not rocket science. It's just like helping people to see that stuff for themselves. Like I tell everybody, like you need to start questioning your decisions. Every decision, good or bad, that you make. Why are you making it? Right? I'm choosing to eat M&Ms today for my snack. Why? Like why are you doing that? It's like because I really feel like I want to eat it and I can control myself around it. And I was like, okay, like, but or maybe the answer is different because I feel like inside, like anxiety, I'm stressed, and I got this email from my boss, and I just want to eat M&Ms because, and I want to hear whatever you want to say. Like okay, then so let's just start breaking this down a little bit. So there's a trigger here that's kind of leading you to do that, right? So it's kind of like unveiling some of these different things to really help identify. So sometimes, obviously, from the mindset standpoint, the lowest hanging fruit could be just start to figure it out. What triggers you? What triggers you to go to the kitchen and lose yourself at the end of a bag of chips before you even know it? And then, like, finishing it off. And 10 minutes later, you're feeling so guilty of what just happened that you didn't even realize that it did. So sometimes the lowest hanging fruit is figure it out what is causing all these kind of issues. So, because sometimes we do it so habitually that we tend to forget why we're doing it in the first place. And we're so these people struggle so much with these things, but yet they never tend to spend some time to figure it out. Okay, why is this happening, and what can I do differently? So
Yeah, I think a lot of the emphasis gets placed on how are all the ways that I can get to my goal moving forward without looking at what is taking away from your life currently and sort of patching up those leaks. Like, what are the current decisions you're making that are not going in the direction you want to do? So you have to, you're adding things in, you're adding in the vegetables, you're adding in the protein, but you're also dealing with some of the other underlying issues.
yeah, and I think it's and talking a little bit more about, like, because I had this like lesson with one of our group calls the other day, which is like the dials of effort and dials of like wheels of progress. And you can think about, like, imagine that you have this like little dial that you can turn, right? And then think about it's a proverbial dial for your life's goals or your daily goals that you're doing, and any kind of things that you're kind of like doing in terms of life, like maybe nutrition, fitness, mindset, lifestyle, all those different things like that, right? So the more you turn it, is the more things you're adding into your list of things that you have to do on a daily basis, right? So, but that doesn't necessarily mean, what happens with most people is like they feel like, it needs to be turned all the way up, all the things that they have to do, or they just don't even bother turning it at all and then just kind of keep it off. When in reality, sometimes, like, when we start to identify this long hanging fruit, we started to learn how to turn the dial maybe to like the one position first, right? So, like, think about it. I can use a million different analogies. You can think about, for example, like a stove, right? Like, when you kind of put it to one, it's like it's not super warm yet. It's like slightly, like, maybe you can cook something. It's gonna take a little while. Like, this is a great analogy. I just think now I think about it. So, literally, you turn it to one. Something's gonna take a lot longer to cook, but it's still gonna get cooked, right? The more you turn it, the hotter it's going to become, right? The more heat, the more energy is going to require for that process to happen, but it's going to cook a lot faster, right? So I want you guys to think about like that dial that you're turning, obviously, in your stove. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if you completely maybe put it to a one, which is like the bare minimum, right? It doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to cook whatever you're cooking. So think about your life and your goals and your nutrition goals the same way, right? You can literally, because what happens right now is I either turn it all the way up or I turn it off completely. right? So either I get things cooking or I don't anything cooked at all, right? When in reality, sometimes if you put it to a one or a two, which maybe in terms of what your goals look like is those lowest hanging fruits, it's like adding protein with every single meal. And like maybe like you can think about our pillars that we typically teach our clients, which are four: nutrition, lifestyle, mindset, and movement. And we just add one thing into each. Nutrition, the one goal I'm gonna set for this week is making sure I'm adding protein with every meal. My lifestyle, the one thing I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna like plan my grocery shopping once this week because I'm very inconsistent with that. It's gonna happen on a Friday at this time. Number three, and mindset is going to be maybe I'm going to try to catch myself in moments when I'm too stressed. I'm just simply going to acknowledge them. And number four, movement. I'm simply going to go on a walk like twice this week, or maybe even something even simpler, which is I'm going to park far away every single opportunity I get. Those are four things, and that represents your one. That is your lowest hanging fruit, right? And then you start adding things into it. So if you turn it to a three or a four, maybe it's now okay. Like I'm gonna start adding a veg. I'm gonna start building a plate that is like near perfect. Like this is like what my perfect plate is gonna look like for me to help my goals, right? And I'm gonna add the hydration, and I'm gonna add like adding more fruit and vegetables in all these different things. And more you turn it, the harder things become, but then the easier they become for you to be able to achieve them because maybe like they become more natural because at some point that one and two you don't even need to worry about it. Like you can just go straight to a four or five or six. That's really the mentality that I want to make sure that you guys have and that people listening in to kind of start to understand. In our program we call that the minimum effective dose, which is just like what is the simplest thing that you can start to implement, right? That is going to still help you move. So, or I guess in the analogy that I just mentioned is like to get things cooking, or simply not at all. So, hopefully
Yeah.
it's a helpful analogy.
Yeah, and even if you get to that high level, it's okay to turn down the dial if you need to at some point. And it's better to keep that warm than to turn it off completely and just let
Exactly.
everything cool down. It's a
Yeah,
fantastic analogy.
it's
I'm
a
a fan of that
fantastic
one.
analogy. Yeah, like that's the thing too. And sometimes, like going back to it, sometimes you actually have to turn it down, right? Because well, maybe you're going to like burn things up, right? Again, back to the same thing because like maybe that dial 10, which is when things are too hot, right? You are pushing yourself, you're trying to kind of put too many things on your plate. And when you think about like, that, it can mean, for example, for you, it could be like schoolwork. For me, it's going to be like, well, I have like some family things that matters to attend to. And I also have to go and do this and I have to travel and I have all these different things like that. If I try to keep my thing turned, like I'm going to burn out. Like literally that's what that is. Like you burn out from diets and from all different things like that, right? Because of the fact that you're just trying to put way too many different things in your pun intended plate. So that's, I think, the biggest kind of problem, which is people not realizing that you can just turn it down a little bit. And that's exactly what that is. So even at the different levels that you have in your nutrition, it's understanding that sometimes you can go easier on some things and you can hold on to that for a while. Like for example, right now for me, my personal life, I right now have the bandwidth to say I'm gonna like maybe turn the dial a little bit more, right? So it's like, okay, I want to lose a little bit of body fat. So for me, that dial looks into like I already worked out 4 to 6 days a week. So now I'm making more like 5 to 6 days a week is my goal because I was already doing that. That was just my minimum commitment. It was like 4 to 6, right? Or 4 to 5. So now I'm like 5 to 6 is my minimum. And I'm adding some movement in the mornings 3 days a week. That to me is like going from like a 5 to like a 6 or a 7, right? Like that's usually what that means to me. Am I gonna do this forever? No, we're planning on having a family, starting. Hopefully we'll have a child soon. So that I'm gonna have to turn it down a little bit because I won't be able to kind of handle all those different things like that. That's really what life is about in terms of like managing your goals and your decisions, so you can obviously kind of focus on what's important and priority for you, what you're ready, willing, and able to do in that process. So
Yeah, that's great. I really like that you just, you've picked those two habits. You're like, I'm going to scale these things up just a little bit, and then that's the next level. It doesn't need to be to crank it up. You don't need to crank that dial to the maximum to get the results faster, but because you know yourself and you know what the process looks like, that if you make those small adjustments, that pushes you in the right direction.
yeah. And hopefully this is kind of gives you guys some sort of like perspective on that. And yeah, I think like, as we finish up, I think the biggest takeaway and homework that you guys can take from listening to this conversation right now, it could be just simply to start to think, what is in my life right now? Question number one is, what is my lowest hanging fruit right now? What is like the immediate step that I can take? And then number two is asking yourself, am I ready, willing, and able to do this action that I'm saying that I can do right now? And usually the way we think about it in psychology is in scales, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to do and make this change? I'm at a solid 9. Okay, that's, if it's like 8 plus, that usually means you're pretty committed to say this is something I'm ready to do. If you, next question would be, are you willing to do it? If it's a 9, yep, you're really willing to do it. And then you go into able, and then it's like a 5. Okay, then start asking yourself why. Well, because I have this X, Y, and Z. So those are obstacles. And when you have those obstacles, it's figure it out. What do you need to do to overcome them? So that able, like, marker that you just put that was a 5 can start to move up a little bit, right? So in the way, the best example I can give people here, it's like, okay, going back to eating maybe a piece of fruit with like dessert after like lunch and dinner, right? You ready to do this? Yes. I'm willing to do this. Yes. Are you able to do it? 5. So, okay, what are some obstacles? Buying the fruit, number one. 2, remembering to actually eat it and incorporate it, because I don't usually do that. 3, I don't like all fruits. 4, I have a husband or a spouse that doesn't like fruit, and usually like it's not very supportive around those things. Okay, so we have 4 obstacles, and we need to figure out how to tackle each one. We need to set a time for grocery shopping. We need to make sure that, fruits are visible for you, so you remember to eat them. So, okay, like here's like, that's obviously what we do in coaching. Is like, let's like brainstorm some ideas so you're able to do this goal that you have for yourself. So one is identify what is your lowest hanging fruit right now in your life, and 2, asking yourself if you're really willing and able to do it, and 3, figure out what those obstacles are going to get between you and achieving those goals, and start kind of brainstorming some ideas in how way in which, or in how you can probably overcome those options as well. So that's a good way to kind of like end
Yeah, I
this.
think that's a great way to end it.
Good. Awesome. Any last minute kind of thoughts, Kenzie, before we wrap it up for today, or any kind of takeaways on here?
I really liked what you said about asking yourself why you're doing something all the time. That is something that I think, because we go through our days mindlessly a lot of the time. And even a choice for me, like, uh, right before this, I was like, I need a snack. There was a bunch of cookies on the counter. I was like, oh, I should grab a cookie. And then I thought, okay, why am I grabbing a cookie? Because it's there, because it would be delicious.
Yep.
But I decided to go for a little bowl of Greek yogurt because I know that that's going to give me some more energy. So my why for choosing Greek yogurt right in this moment is because I want to be on. I want to have lots of energy. So
Yeah.
that can really guide your decisions and um, shift you towards choices that are going to be a loving choice for your body and take you closer to your goals. And it doesn't mean I'll never have the cookie. It's just, in this
Yeah.
moment, my why shifted me towards a different decision.
Exactly. And I said this, like, I mean, have you ever like, talked to like a 5-year-old, 4-year-old, you know,
Yeah.
what's their like, when you ask them to do something and you say like, hey, go and do this, what's the first thing they ask?
Why? And then
Exactly. And then you tell them like, oh, because you need
yeah.
to do this. And what's the second thing they ask?
Why?
Why? Right? So be like a 4-year-old, like, okay, like I need to, like, I want to eat that cookie. Why? Like, well, because it really sounds so good. Like, but why do I want to do that? Well, because I just want to like feel like, this is something that makes me happy, and that kind of like sugar taste, something that soothes me. But why does that happen?
Mhm.
Because I've always been rewarded with that when I was, growing up, and this is the kind of things that I typically go because it's my safe place. Okay. So now we got to the bottom of that. So now we can kind of start to reverse engineer that and start to figure it out. Okay, like, why do you make the decisions that you make? That is it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
self-reflection
it's
is
putting
such a
that
powerful
intention
tool.
behind it.
Exactly, which is like the main thing. So great. Well, this was a great conversation. Kenzie, thank you so much for being a great moderator and podcast sidekick here today. I love to say sidekick, 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 sidekick. Um, So if you guys like enjoy this, of course, make sure like right now you're listening to this, like what you can do for us, if you want to share the love and you enjoy this episode, is like right now take your phone, if you're not driving, of course, and screenshot this, and now go on your favorite social media and just simply post it on your stories or whatever it is, and just simply tag me. You can also tag Kenzie. Is it Nibble to Nourish, correct?
Yeah, nibble to nourish.
Yeah, Nibble to Nourish or at Andres Ayesta, and you can tag us and you can literally say whatever, like, oh my God, this is such a great episode. You guys should listen to it. But we would love to for you to tag us so we also kind of see it. And of course, like you can like kind of share it with the world so more people can learn about this and can just continue to improve their lifestyles, maybe think through some of these different things that we typically share. So, Kenzie, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you guys again for listening to the Nutrition Blueprint podcast. We'll see you guys next week.